Hi, everyone. People seem to really like the parts 1 and 2 of that discussion that I was having with my friend about INFP and ENFP dynamics as evidenced in this episode of the Late Late Show from way back when. So I thought I might as well finish it up because all of that talking I did, which amounted to about 42 minutes uncut, was concerning the first 2 minutes of this 10-minute interview, roughly. So that's outrageous. That's just outrageous. And so here's a little side note. Again, any of you who've been watching my videos and or know any ENFPs, you know that, and I understand this is a case with the ENTPs too. It's been discussed in at least a couple of episodes over at the YouTube channel, Talking with Famous People, that there's a kind of looping that happens that you just have to, with the dominant NE people, you just have to trust that eventually we're going to loop back to whatever it is that we started out with after 80 billion parentheticals that we're trying to cram in all at once because we're such non-linear thinkers that everything comes in at once. We have a terrible time prioritizing and structuring it. Some people are worse at it than others. I'm obviously horrendous at that. And so you have to trust that after I crush everything in that I can, I will come back. Just hang on. I will come back. And somehow it will make some kind of sense at the end, I promise. Anyhow, I'm going to not loop so much for this. So part 3. Basically, I just watched the rest of the interview and made some notes about things I noticed going on between the two of them and their respective showing of FE and FI. FE in the case of INFJ Carey Mulligan and FI in the case of the host Craig Ferguson. So here's something also I'd like to correct too that I noticed. I said in parts 1 and 2 that Carey Mulligan was not embarrassed. I think maybe she was a little bit embarrassed at times. You can see her, she's doing this. It's extremely cute. She's laughing a lot. Ferguson is making her laugh a lot, and she's touching her nose, and she's curling up like this and giggling away, and the shrinking aspect makes me think she feels really shy. And she probably is a little embarrassed, but she's not embarrassed because, part of my old point still stands, or I still maintain it, that it's not that she is worried or that I think if she's worried about anything or it's not that he's embarrassing her with what he's saying so much as I think she's very, very extremely self-conscious, as INFJs are, as all the NFs are. But INFJs, particularly when they're on display and they're not with people they know very well and are very comfortable with, then they'll feel extremely self-conscious. But they also have this need that is dictated by their auxiliary extroverted feeling to engage and to be gracious and engaging and to be part of things and to attend to the morale of the group and to promote harmony within the group and all the things that are associated with FE. So they really do come forward. They really step up, even when it goes against their grain to do so. And she's very much doing this in this interview. You can see it all over the place. So I think what she's worried about here is that, she's finding it so funny and she's enjoying the humor so much. I think she's worried that she will get carried away and she's going to say something that she'll regret, because of course Ferguson is very disinhibited and he is going to do his best to, he's going to say whatever comes into his mind, more or less. So she's maybe a little worried that she'll get carried away as well and then do some sort of disservice to herself or the film she's representing, and she really would not want to do that. So if she's worried, I think that's what she's worried about. But who knows? I'm not inside her mind. But yeah, she's giggling and she's shy. And so here's some examples of this sort of terrific banter that I see going on between them, and that I feel, as I was watching it, I was smiling ear to ear as well, because it's impossible to count the number of times I've enjoyed such fantastic banter with INFJs. It seems to come really, really naturally. And part of what is so beautiful about it and so funny about it, and why I think it's particularly noteworthy, as seen in this document as well, is that you've got two people who are so apparently different. So different. One's very, very introverted. The other is very, very extroverted. One is very, very careful about what they say. The other is wild and just letting whatever comes into mind come right out, and is being really outrageous. One seems to be very mature and together and, again, proper, just proper. The other one is not at all. One is very loud and loquacious. The other one is much more sort of modest in their presentation and very conscious of taking turns and not saying too much and being very, very polite. So the fact that you can have two people who are so very, very different come together, and without having met, probably they just had a quick, hello, how are you? Welcome to the show, backstage before this interview, very early on in Mulligan's career. And that's probably the only time they've spent together before they're in front of an audience of millions doing this show, taping the show. So, so it's I think it's very remarkable that if you watch the interview, you watch the full thing, you see how very, very well they're getting along and how they're just going back and forth in a very smooth way, and they're setting up each other's jokes, and there's just this tremendous mental rapport going on between these two very different kinds of people. And I think that owes a great deal to the shared dominant intuition, dominant cognitive function that they have. NI in the case, or introverted intuition in the case of Mulligan, and extroverted intuition in the case of Ferguson. But so those are very different. I don't mean to conflate the two. They should not be. They're very, very different in nature and what they specialize in and what they do. However, what they both are very, very good at in general is pattern detection, and creative thinking, and thinking abstractly, and coming up with strange inspirations out of nowhere and following them. The INFJ will follow them with a very interior focus most of the time, and off on their own, whereas the ENFP will have to go out, and the ENTP as well, who also shares the extroverted intuition dominant function, will have to go out in the world and put things out in the world and play with them outside of the self in order to really realize what they are about to explore, which is what NE is all about. So, so let's go through just a few of the things I saw in this. And by all means, if you viewers, if you've seen other things and you feel like commenting on them, that would be great. I would love to read them. I'm sure other people would like to see what you have to say too. So please do. So, so at some point he makes some gambit. He starts joking around with her about, do you making mistakes, silly mistakes, and saying, do you do the tweeters? Do you keep up with the tweeters or whatever? And that makes her laugh. And she's like, no, I don't do that. And she said, what do you young folks do, or whatever it is you young folks do? And she says, I don't know. You'd have to ask one. Now, I think that's great. That's a really great typical moment in a way, because here she is. She is 24 years old at the time of this taping. He has at least 20 years on her. But who looks older? Like, who seems to be the older one, right? Who's the older in spirit? And I know that that's the case for INFJs, that many INFJs are on record as having said, and many in my life have said to me, that they have always felt themselves to be old souls. And many people in their lives who've been close to them have also commented on that as they were growing up, that they seemed a lot older than their years. They seemed a lot wiser than their years. And that's a real thing with most INFJs. So I think she must have felt that too. And I think that's hilarious that, there they are. And he's obviously, 20 years younger than her. And, I made reference in my own video of the INTJ, INFJ formality video I did. Don't believe everything you hear. And I made reference to my INFJ friend, Will, who is a full 15 years younger than me. But we have a running joke where he calls himself, and he started it, and I call him too. He signs off his little emails to me and stuff with Grandpa Willie. because he is so much older than I am, even though I am this wrinkly old person in fact, but he in spirit is older than I am, and he's far more mature, I can assure you. So anyway, it's really funny. So you see that with Ferguson and Mulligan. You see also, you can see that although she's very, very shy throughout the rest of the interview too, that continues. She doesn't loosen up all the way, but you can tell that through her body language that she does feel comfortable with him to an extent, and that there is a nice rapport going. So even though she's carefully seated and sitting very properly and in her chair, you can see that she keeps reaching out her left hand to him to sort of, she reaches right onto the desk, and she's saying something. And that's a body language signal of comfort and of wanting to engage with the person. You don't do that to people that, especially not when you're laughing your guts out, with a big smile on your face, you don't do things like that unless you're feeling connected to that person, So that's how she sort of, you can see the shyness and the introversion, but you can also see the rapport that's going on with these two. And of course, he's just, being super inappropriate and is all over the place, physically, mentally, verbally. That's ENFP a lot of the time. Anyway, so then they start talking at one point about snowboarders, and again, what I want you to notice here in this rapport between the two of them, this rapport of two dominant ends, having a good two strangers who are so different, but who are having quite a good time verbally and mentally very quickly. And I mean, by this point, we're only at we're about 2.5 minutes into the interview when the snowboarder thing comes in, and she offers. Oh, first of all, it's introduced with him mentioning something about skiing, and she says, "I ski," and then she says, "You ski," like this, and she reaches up, "You ski," with a intonation going up at the end in a kind of excited way. And that is some classic FE in action right there. What that says is that she has done some research on him before coming on the show, probably so that she will be sure to do the right thing, and so that she will have some, INFJs, and as introverts do in general, particularly for something like this, which is a nightmare for them, to have to go out and do publicity of any kind is a nightmare. So she would have wanted to be prepared before, especially as an INFJ. She would have wanted to be prepared. She would have wanted to make a nice impression. She would have wanted to get along with Ferguson. She would have wanted to be sure not to run out of things that she could talk about. So she's very happy that there's this opportunity where she can make a connection with him, which is, and again, in a very proper and socially acceptable way. Like, oh, I do that hobby. Oh, let's find the common ground. I do that too. So she jumps out with that, and and immediately the two of them start going into this banter of similes. Again, more wordplay, and it's just coming up naturally with both of them. And that's a very dominant, intuitive thing to do. Not that people of other types don't do that. Even S's do that sometimes. But what is significant here is that these are two strangers who are totally different, who are on display in front of millions of people. It's a very nerve-wracking situation, potentially. And they are doing it constantly. And they are doing it spontaneously. These aren't two old friends who are hanging around on a dock, and have reason to feel totally comfortable. And they're playing like that. These two are just playing like that. I wager because they can't help it. Because that's what dominant N makes you do, whether you share that with the other person or not, even the people with NI in the dominant slot, they're doing that kind of thing. That kind of stuff is going on in their heads all the time, whether or not they actually speak it or share it with others. And those of us with NE, we're going to be just blabbing on about it wherever we can. So, hoping someone will get it. So she jumps in when the snowboarders come up. She jumps in saying, they're like the bullies at school. Again, very creative thinking. That's an associative thing to say. And he gets it right away and says, you know what? If they were at Hogwarts, they would be like the Slytherin at Hogwarts. And then she just bursts into laughter, She thinks that's hilarious. So they're just going snap, 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 like volleying back and forth really fast, really capably, really confidently, getting more and more relaxed all the time, and having a lot of fun playing with one another, verbally, cognitively. So he makes the obnoxious comment at some point, and he challenges her in a joking way and says, "What's wrong with you?" what's wrong with you? I don't really, are you young at all? I don't believe you're young. I think you might be a fresh midget. And of course, that makes her burst into laughter as well. And, that's, again, making reference to the fact that there does seem to be this mental age disparity going on between them, which is completely belies the actual chronological age disparity between them. And she laughs and laughs, and no doubt she knows exactly it's not the first time she's, surely she's aware that she is older than her years, and others have commented on that. She's very mature for her age. So that's really funny. And then they jump, and then again, he's just jumping, doing the anything. That's why so many ENTPs and so many talk show hosts are ENTPs and ENFPs, because they're excellent people with dominant extroverted intuition in the top slot are excellent at improvising. We're not just good at it. We love to do it. We're comfortable doing it. We're good at it. We can be interested in just about anything. We don't even want to prepare a lot of the time for interviews. We'll do the minimum amount of preparation because we almost feel like it might ruin it if we were to rehearse it, which is pretty much the opposite attitude of an introverted judger. It's pretty much the absolute opposite of what they want to do, and what makes them feel comfortable is what works for us. So yeah, anyway, so he talks about where she lives, where she's from, and he says you're English. Obviously, she's got the RP the standard pronunciation going on like crazy. You're English. And he says, where'd you live? England. Making a silly joke, and she just says without missing a beat, yeah, it's great. She's like, yeah, and just like plays the straight man to what he's doing, but she's doing it very subtly, right? Like, again, she's an introvert. She's she's very shy. She's very focused on the inner world all the time, but she's peeking out. She's doing her duty in this interview, and so she's right away. She's just, without missing a beat, she just goes right into playing with him. She knows exactly what's happening, and she is they're both keeping up with each other. It's not one person. Like, I'm sure what Craig Ferguson has done in other shows, and we could look at hundreds of examples of these, is the key is making his guests laugh with his outrageousness. But it's not every day that it's not every guest that just comes right back at him in half a second and knows exactly how to play the game with him, and just naturally knows how to do that. And she does, because she's a dominant intuitive. I wager that a lot of people with the auxiliary, with one of the cognitive functions in the auxiliary position, could also, I know many of them can banter very well also and be very clever. But that really does go with people who have the intuitive function, that preference. So now where we go. And then here's another example of her giving away the fact she's a dominant intuitive, where pretty much right out of left field, she just looks and says of the backdrop for the set, that looks really real on telly. Now, it's slightly apropos of what came before, but not really, not really. But this is the thing with the INFJs, right? They look so normal. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them look so normal, and they present themselves in a semi-formal kind of way. Some people might even think they're a bit stiff sometimes, and that they'll persist in a kind of formality a long time beyond the point a lot of others in their environment will have. They're very careful to be appropriate, but they will say things like that, and you might not notice them unless you're attuned to it, or you're attuned to it. You're looking for that, as I am in this case, and that's a weird comment to just make that observation without any preamble. But of course, he's fine with that. That's just fine, and they go off and talk about it. Another example of the kind of mental verbal play that they're doing is when he asks, how old were you? This is an example of her asking, how old were you during your driving test, during that part of the interview? And then she very quickly adds, if you don't mind my asking. Now, that is a really FE type of thing to do, what she just did. I mean, here he is. He is obviously in his 40s. the gray hair and everything. There's no question, and he's absolutely outrageous and unconventional. I'm pretty sure he's not sweating it, that people know what his real age is, especially as a fellow ENFP who's all about authenticity because of the auxiliary introverted feeling in the second slot. Like, I'm pretty sure Craig Ferguson is not going to be offended by that question, but she feels the need to say that. That's very FE of her to do that. And FE is in the auxiliary position in INFJ. And now just contrast that. Her, the very young lady, making sure to not ask him the potentially offensive question, the potentially impolite question of how old he is. But look at what he does at the very beginning of the interview, several minutes before that, where he blurts it out and asks how old she is, and then very quickly retracts it and says, "Oh, I shouldn't ask you that," and speaks that thought aloud. That is classic ENFP. That's classic ENFP of doing the kind of thing that I was describing in parts 1 and 2, where we have this cycle of blurt and then restrain, blurt and then restrain. That was what he did. He blurted it out. He just wanted to know how old she was, and then immediately he went, "Oh, I probably shouldn't ask that." He spoke it aloud, which is that annoying thing that we do, which is so much of our cognitive processing is on the outside. We don't know what we're going to say until we say it. We don't know what we think until we say it half the time. And that is the truth. So, yeah. And he says that he did it at 27. And then she, without missing a beat, just says, well, I've got till 27 then. So that's another part of banter that I often have with other people with the N preference up high, and particularly with those who have the dominant N going on. So I have that with other ENFPs, ENTPs, and with ENTPs, I have this with INFJs and INTJs. And I'm sure there's some, I'm almost nerdy enough to look this up, but not quite. Maybe someone out there is. I'm sure there's a name for that device, that rhetorical device in humor. I don't know what it is, and I kind of don't want to know, but I don't want to be so nerdy to actually go look it up, but I am kind of curious. But her like making up some arbitrary rule. Well, I've got till 27 then. Like that's a kind of joke I would make all the time. And here's this young INFJ doing it. So this is another example. We just, again, mentally, we get each other to a really strange degree, unless you consider the inner workings of the cognitive machinations going on according to the Jungian functions, in which we have quite a bit in common, really. In a general sense, we have a lot in common. And then so he rambles on, then he goes in and rambles on about something else, and says, they're talking about her coming from Liverpool and her Irish background, and he just, again, makes a very ENFP typical joke of by asking her straight, do you have a drink problem? And again, he's playing with the fact, that's a layer of the humor, is that he's playing with the fact that he very plainly has before him a very shy, giggly, worried she's going to get carried away. So of course he's going to go for it. He's going to go for it even more because he can see that it's being well received, that she's loving it, but he can also see it's dangerous. And like as a comedian, he knows like that's just going to get funnier and funnier. So he's pushing it. He knows that, and he knows he's not offending her. He's not upsetting her. He's just worrying her that she's going to have too much fun and make a mess of things. So, so he says, "Do you have a drink problem?" And then she, again, without missing a beat, totally plays the straight man and just says, "That's why I'm here." So, I mean, if you were to break, I'm not going to be quite this nerdy. I'm being pretty damn nerdy, obviously, but I'm not going to be quite this nerdy enough to do this. But I'll bet you that if you were to go and break this down and code it, this 10-minute interview, you would, and you were to do, take a look at the data, you would probably find, I am guessing, that at least or close to 50% of all of the dialogue that goes on between the two of them in that 10 minutes is wordplay, similes, metaphor, frames, I want to say frame substitution. That's a linguistic term, not exactly, but a kind of using kind of absurdist humor and changing the frame of a situation to make a situationally comic moment, making fun of the arbitrary nature of such structures. These are all very big picture type humor devices that I know that I do this with INFJs all the time, and this is a real thing that happens. The last thing I'll close with in talking about it is that if you also look at the content of what they're saying, you will also notice that quite often through the interview, each of them is showing that they have a feeling function, FI in the case of Ferguson, FE in the case of Mulligan. Again, I don't mean to say that these are very, very different functions, but they both are going to be naturally concerned and naturally attuned to how other people feel in different ways and with different prioritization and different modes of expressing that, different sort of habits of expressing that, and different habits of mind behind the expression of it. But they both are going to be very emotionally sensitive and concerned with the other, and very interested in other people, and very interested in the reactions and what is going on with the other person that they're with. And you'll notice, and also here's the other part of FI, which is at least maybe even more important. I probably should have started with this, because this is the point that needs to be made more, that the so-called feeling functions within the Jungian typology system, and then by extension in the MBTI, the feeling function isn't just about feelings, although it is about that. But at least as importantly, what it's meant to denote is value systems. People who have a feeling function in the auxiliary position or in the dominant position in their cognitive stack, those types are types that are very centered on very aware of value systems and are very centered on them. And FI, introverted feeling in particular, is quite obsessed with. Each person who has FI in prominence is quite obsessed with their own value system and is really, really beholden to honoring it no matter what. So anyway, there's all kinds of other stuff out there online about the differences between those two, the two feeling cognitive functions. But you can see that both of them have a feeling function in prominence, because if you look at a transcript of what they're saying, there are a lot of comments that are value judgments of, oh, isn't that terrible, or that's wonderful, or I think that's wonderful, or I love it when. And what you find with people with FI in prominence is that, and especially if they're extroverted, is very often our speech is going to be peppered with value judgments. We are and usually quite emphatic ones. You will also see, if you listen very closely to what, say, INFPs are saying in a given moment, they have introverted feeling running their show. It's in the dominant position. Now, they may be quiet a lot of the time, but when they're with people they're comfortable with, or in a small group, or even better, a small group of people they're comfortable with, you might not even be able to tell that they are introverts. They will be behaving exactly, in many cases, they'll be behaving exactly as extroverts do all the time, or pretty much all the time. They'll be very disinhibited and speaking their minds and joining in. And in those cases, the people with the FI in prominence, their value judgments will also be rather raw, and they tend to be quite emphatic. There's a lot more use of, I hate this, I love this. The feelings are strong. The feelings in FI people run very, very deep and all the time, and we're always aware of them. And those are tied in with the value system stuff, but those are two major components of the so-called the feeling functions. So you can see if you look at it and listen again, that Mulligan and Ferguson are making lots of value judgments just to the side. They're just little commentaries. But when I do upcoming ones with so-called rational types, you will notice, if you really break it down and take a look at it closely, you will be able to add it up. It will be quantitative. You will not see NTs. They will be saying a lot of, I think, or as far as I can see. They'll be using sort of analytical commentary. Doesn't mean they will never say, I love this, I hate this, I like this, etc. It's just that they will it's a matter of emphasis, like everything else in this MBTI related stuff and typing and sorting things out. They will be making value judgments. They will be speaking their value judgments much, much, much less often than people with F in the first position or in the auxiliary position in the cognitive function stack. Okay, that's enough of that, and thank you for joining me again. And please, if you have anything to tell me, anything you want to share with the others, anything you'd like to comment on, please do. I just love it, and I try and answer all the comments, and it would be great. And thanks for watching. Goodbye.